Welcome to the first ever episode of Fossil Fools, the podcast where we talk about climate change so you don't have to.
Everything wiped out. Maybe the last broadcast.
I'm Emma, a PhD researcher in Environmental Humanities, and joining me today is my fabulous co-host Daisy.
Hello, I'm Daisy, and I work in fashion design in the fashion industry. And today we're going to be diving into a topic that's both critical and complex, and that is just how deeply interconnected colonialism, climate change, and consumerism are. We're exploring these themes through Arja Barber's book, Consumed.
Arja does a great job of connecting the dots between historical exploitation, modern consumer habits, and the ongoing climate crisis. It's a call to action that is both hopeful and empowering, giving us not just the why, but the how of making a difference.
Exactly. We'll discuss how Arja urges us to rethink our roles, not just as consumers, but as citizens of a global community. She emphasises the importance of addressing these issues together rather than in isolation, and provides practical steps we can take to drive systematic change.
So, whether you're new to these conversations or looking to deepen your understanding, we read this book so you don't have to. Stay tuned as we unpack Consumed and explore how we as consumers can contribute to creating a more sustainable world. So, how did you find the book overall?
I really enjoyed the book, actually. I think from it being written from someone that has actually been in the fashion industry and has that first-hand experience, it was just really interesting to hear her point of view. And she's from a slightly different part of the fashion industry than I am, because she was more publishing and less of the design side. But it's interesting because I think a lot of the experience she's had kind of cross over with mine, and I can, relate to. But yeah, I thought it was a really good book. I think I wasn't expecting actually all the talk about how the people side of the fashion crisis kind of, affects communities. So that was a new kind of area for me to reflect on.
I also found it really interesting. And obviously I don't have a background in fashion. I'm dedicated to my leggings and active wear, even when I'm not active. So yeah, it was really interesting hearing about the ways that fashion and the climate crisis and colonialism all sort of intersect at various points.
Yeah, I definitely think as well, when we were chatting about this before we're sitting down to do this, I think you were quite shocked at a lot of the fashion figures that are quite well known to me.
Yeah.
And the scale of the fashion industry, and, Arja Barber talks about, how few times things are worn and the actual scale of production in the fashion industry, which obviously for me, having studied fashion, been in the fashion industry for coming up for 4 or 5 years now, they were kind of I was yeah, that's just how it is. Yeah. So then it's interesting as well for someone like yourself. It reminds you actually, no, that is shocking.
Yeah.
The scale of production. Yeah.
I was shook. And even seeing, because you see it on Instagram all the time, people will post this is how many garments H&M add to their website every week. And it's just unimaginable millions of things that are created. People just don't really think about what the process behind that is. But obviously you've got quite a good idea because you've done the sort of behind the scenes stuff.
And also being a maker as well, from having been a seamstress and, studied fashion and actually being able to make clothes, you have a different level of appreciation from the average consumer who has never had to make a garment. So you are a bit more in touch with, the complexity, how long things take. I think, people buying stuff off Shein is or Primark or other really cheap brands. It's they don't want to pay more than a £5 for a t-shirt. But actually, yes, production lines are, refined now, and there's a lot of machinery that does the work for you, but every machine still has to be human operated. And we haven't found a way of replicating that human input into making clothes yet. So every £5 t-shirt comes at a much bigger cost.
I find myself guilty of that quite a lot as well, going into shops and seeing a t-shirt for 20 quid. In my mind, that's a lot to pay for a t-shirt, and I don't want to pay that much for it. But realistically, I probably should be. Yeah. At least.
Yeah. But even me, I'm even guilty of that. And I know how much work goes into making t-shirts because I've done it, you know, and how much work goes into making a beautiful jacket or a skirt or trousers or whatever, because I've made those things. I think that's a two-pronged thing. I think we've been exposed to cheap clothing, and so as a consumer, and we talk about this all the time, you know, in the industry, is the consumer going to understand why they're having to pay £10 more? If it was, say, a sustainable fibre, or there was something that made it more premium, are they going to understand why they're paying more than Primark for our t-shirt? And then also, I think, and Arja Barber gets into this bit as well, we've both come from like fairly working class backgrounds, and there's that kind of scarcity thing as well, and we've not had the luxury to splash out on really expensive but ethical clothing. And there's something that she touches upon in the book, but that's also something that I think is a really interesting topic, because the answer to the climate crisis and the, you know, fashion's input in that isn't just going out and buying loads of expensive clothes that are sustainable or from ethical brands. And I think I definitely was guilty of thinking that for a really long time. So
that's true. And a lot of that is advertising, isn't it, as well? Like, you know, being told that the way that you can be sustainable is to go out and buy this sustainable thing. It's adding to the problem.
And we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? About this trend at the minute of the underconsumption core. And I think that's like fits nicely into that thing of there's a specific aesthetic to being sustainable now.
There really is. Oh, we can totally get into that now. I mean, Arja talks in the book about tote bags, specifically,
and free t-shirts previously, but now it's more of like a tote bag.
Absolutely. So free t-shirts initially, then everyone got sick of free t-shirts.
Everyone had enough free t-shirts.
Everyone had too many free t-shirts. So then it became free tote bags. And I'm kind of wondering what it's going to be next, because I'm getting sick of free tote bags. I've got so many tote bags. I've tote bags out the wazoo. And like, to the public eye, a tote bag is part of this sort of sustainable aesthetic. But, you know, when the tote bags are produced on that scale and everyone's got hundreds of them, how sustainable are they?
I've made bags out of like recycled materials before, as in offcuts and dead stock. And I've made you a tote bag before, haven't you?
It's fantastic.
And when
I'll put a photo in the show notes.
And when I came to like start selling these, they were expensive, but actually probably cheaper than what I should have been charging. But I couldn't justify charging more for them because a tote bag is a commodity item now.
That's true.
And like we say, everyone has a lot of free ones. And I think when we say free tote bags, free t-shirts, what we mean is when you go to events, you know, you get free bags with purchases. It's these tote bags we're talking about, not tote bags that you might purchase at, you know, if they've got a particular print on, or you've gone to somewhere and you've purchased it as like merch or something. We're talking about stuff that you just get given. And a lot of the time the quality of those items is really low, and they're not actually made to do the job of like a long lasting tote bag. It's just a little freebie. And who doesn't love a freebie? So it's really difficult, isn't it?
Exactly. It's so true. And like I end up with so much free stuff because it's hard to say no to it. And I think it is that the scarcity mindset. Like if you're getting given something for free, why would you not take it?
I think definitely the scarcity mindset thing speaks to this current cost of living crisis we're in as well. And people aren't going to turn things down. What Arja talks about is these items have no value once you've given them away, because they were already free, and no one wants a free tote bag you've got from like, I don't know, a UCAS fair, or going to an open day, or going to the body shop or something. They have no value afterwards. So, and then a lot of this stuff ends up in landfill.
That's true.
And that's when it becomes more of a problem.
But
I think the underconsumption core thing that we were looking at that's trending on TikTok at the minute, that's kind of the opposite of this. It's more like really expensive investment pieces, or oftentimes they can be expensive investment pieces. You're only meant to buy the one thing and then it sets you up. But then next month, the better like keep cup is going to come along that you have to have. And so those things, you know, maybe do have a bit more value. But then if there's like hundreds of keep cups in charity shops, that value actually then goes down. So then you kind of end up in the same place where, you know, these like really sustainable, like, I don't know, it could be tops, like bags, whatever, keep cups. Essentially, it's all going to end up in the same place as the free tote bags.
Yeah. Speaking of charity shops as well, Aja talks about the concept of NIMBYism when it comes to fashion, which we did chat about before
we were talking about
recording. Yeah, so she talks about NIMBYism in the sense that, you know, when you get something like, say, a free UCAS tote bag, or you know, you've got an old T-shirt that you don't really want anymore, you think someone somewhere will want it. And that immediately sets up a sort of hierarchy where you're at the top, like, I don't want it, but somebody like poorer than me will want it.
Yeah.
So you're sort of, you know, setting yourself up as sort of more deserving of nice things, perhaps, than others. Do you want to chat a bit about the process of decluttering, giving stuff to charity shops, and then it, you know, ended up in landfill?
I have worked in charity shops before, as well. So I think, to start off with, I think people do mean well when they want to donate things because they think they're doing a good thing.
Yeah.
And Aja touches on this in the book as well. But ultimately, when you send stuff to charity shops, not everything gets sold. And actually, the stuff that you think, oh, it's got a hole in, I'll give it to charity because I'm not going to wear it, but someone else might, you know, be able to repair it and they'll wear it.
Yeah, that NIMBY attitude.
Exactly, that NIMBY attitude. That stuff doesn't make it to the shop floor because it's not fit for sale. And unless you're at like a vintage shop where they have seamstresses and rework artists, which I have done, and I have sewn buttons back onto things and I have stitched things up and hemmed things for customers, the people in these charity shops don't have the time and resources to mend everything. So it goes in a rag bag, and essentially that gets shipped off, put into big bundles, and it's bought by companies from the charity shops by weight. It's not on the quality of goods, what the goods are, what brands they are. It's just purely the weight of the clothes. And that gets shipped up, and a lot of it gets sent out to the Cantamonto markets in Ghana, which a lot of people don't know about. I was aware about before, but actually she goes into a lot more detail in this book. And on the face of it, the Cantamonto market seemed like a really exciting, cool, like sustainable thing. Essentially what happens is all the clothes that the West don't want are bundled up and shipped off to Ghana. And in Cantamonto markets, there are lots of stall owners and they sell on the secondhand goods. And some of them will upcycle the things as well. But sometimes they're just selling on at face value what they get. And so they buy these big bundles of clothes, which are not sorted. It's just a mixture. So you could have a whole bundle of Primark and Shein, or you might get, you know, some Gap and some like branded things like Nike, mixed in. So it's a real gamble, and you're paying again by weight. Like, people pay for rags on this end.
Bales of clothes.
Exactly. And, there are women who ferry the clothes from the harbour to the market traders, which is actually a very dangerous job, and people can get really hurt because these bales are super heavy and these women carry them on their heads, and a lot of the time they carry their children with them. And so it's been known for children to be like crushed under the weight of these bales if they fall. So it's really dangerous. But essentially what the traders then do is they sell on these goods, and a lot of the time they get into debt to actually pay for the bales in the first place. And they don't always make a return on the clothes because sometimes it's really poor quality.
Really risky.
And there is a market in Ghanaian culture for Western goods because of the colonialism within Ghana. It was seen that if you were wearing Western clothes rather than traditional Ghanaian outfits.
It's like a sort of social signifier.
Exactly. So then these clothes get sold on to the Ghanaian community. And then anything that's not sold at the Cantamonto markets basically goes to landfill because that is the end of the line. And it's then the Ghanaian government's and Ghanaian people's problem to deal with all this rubbish clothes that haven't been sold on because they're not fit for resale. And it's a huge problem, and it's taking up a lot of their land, trying to dispose of all this stuff, and it's polluting their environment because they're trying to make a living selling on these clothes.
And so many of the clothes will be made of kind of shitty materials.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't know if we're swearing on this podcast, but I just did.
We are now.
Yeah, like there's so many shitty materials and like, microplastics. So they're not, they're not just going to go away. They are there for a long, long time. Longer than a human lifetime.
Yeah.
Longer than several
generations.
Human lifetimes.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really big problem, and it speaks a lot to the colonialism that Barber talks about, because it's the West creating a problem and imposing the backlash of that onto communities that we've already pillaged.
Yeah.
So it's just a continuation of
exactly.
that.
It is. Like we're, instead of invading them with, guns and stuff, we're just invading them with all of our shitty clothes that we don't want.
Yeah. It's that NIMBYism thing again that we've spoken about, that it's not good enough for us, but we feel like we're doing them a favour.
Yeah.
And actually, they'd have probably been much better off wearing the clothes that they've always worn and speak to their heritage.
Yeah.
And we've interfered with this consumerist fashion system that we've created. But a lot of the stuff that you're shipping off to charity shops is never actually going to be reused in the UK or wherever you are. It actually gets shipped off to other countries and it becomes other countries and other people's problems. And as Arja talked about in the book, and as we can talk about now, a lot of that ends up in developing, what we call developing countries, and it becomes their problem.
Yeah, and exactly. And Arja talks about this language issue as well, and she talks about what we would usually call developing countries as historically pillaged countries. Yeah. And I think that's one of the important places where colonialism plays a really intersecting part in this whole thing, because these historically pillaged countries, these countries that have been invaded, and their progress in air quotes has sort of been stalled by empires trying to take them over, and they've sort of become dumping grounds essentially for the things that we don't want.
There was a saying as well, isn't there, within Cantamonto, that the clothes that come in are like the dead white man's clothes, because to them, there's a lot of the goods in the beginning are so nice that they just thought no one could be throwing these away. The people wearing them must have died. Yeah. And it's just like a juxtaposition, that we're throwing all these really good quality things away, sending them to these countries that are traditionally pillaged, that we've interfered with. Yeah. And it's just a continuation of that interference and imposition.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like worldwide NIMBYism.
Yeah. Arja speaks about this as well. Like, she says in America, the black communities are targeted for like new waste disposal sites and things, and no one kicks up a fuss because it's not in their area where they live.
It's not in my backyard.
It's an extension of that, isn't it?
Yeah. Arja also talks about the polluting effects of the fashion industry, and the particular example that she uses is the Citarum River in Indonesia. So because this river is the center for a lot of textile factories in Indonesia, essentially what happens is the waste that is produced from making these textiles, chemical treatments and dyes and all of this kind of stuff. And not just chemicals, but heavy metals. I also read that the mercury levels in the Citarum are 4 times above what is recommended as safe. I think that number is from 2014, so a good 10 years ago. But whether that number is right or not, it's still one of the most polluted rivers in the world. And that is because these 1,000 textile factories line its shores and dump toxic waste into it to make our clothes.
And essentially the knock-on effect of that is the community in that area have been getting really sick from the textile outputs, because creating textiles, dyeing textiles, finishing textiles is a really water-hungry process. And unless you have a really up-spec high-tech mill set up, then the old practices are really dirty and consume a lot of water that should be there for the people in that community to drink and use, because water should be a human right.
Yeah.
Fresh water, clean water.
Yeah.
And so they have no choice but to work in those textile factories because that is the export of their area. But then it's also what's making their communities really sick.
Yeah.
And it's another example of this NIMBYism. Like, we wouldn't have that in the UK or in the US. And Barber talks about a fire at a textile mill in New York, and how after that point, the New York legislation around textiles and factories and industry became really tight, and rightly so, because a lot of people were hurt in this fire. But then the result of that was, well, we'll just take the industry to countries where the regulations aren't as strict. So the malpractice is still there. It's just not affecting us directly.
Yeah, it's just shifted. It's a pattern that we see all the time with any sort of loopholes that make a process cheaper. They will be taken. And that's where the capitalism, like consumerism of it all comes in. Capitalism relies on people making things as cheaply as possible and marking them up as much as possible to make the most profit. That's what everyone is after. And that's how you win capitalism. And because these historically pillaged countries are poorer on a global scale, companies can get away with paying them less for jobs that people in the West would demand.
They're right in the streets if they had to make clothes for less than £2,000 a year as an annual salary.
Yeah.
The UK in particular have quite strict rules about the standards of where you produce garments, and then also companies will have their own policies around that. So there's like the minimum amount you have to accept, and then also better, more ethical brands will have stricter rules. So there are certifications around this. So things like Hig Index and Architects are around like the production of things and the waste and disposal of chemicals and dye stuffs like we were talking about earlier. But a lot of it is actually about labour welfare. But what happens is the buyers within the industry have a lot of pressure to meet their target margins to make the most money for the company. And so what happens is buyers are really hard negotiators, and they will push the factories down, and the factories have to accept the business because they want the business. And so a lot of the time what happens is factories promise that they can produce things at X price, which is unachievable to do within the welfare standards that the company expects. So a lot of the time what happens is things are subcontracted out. So what that means is the factory you've audited are really good, nice and clean, really good welfare practices that you think your garments are being made at. Actually, maybe only 10% is being made there, and the other 90% is being made at a factory round the corner in shocking working conditions to be able to meet that price quota. And then if companies find out that that's happening, then they kind of go, well, we didn't know. We were told that it was being made in our audited factory. And what happens is the factory owners will be fined really heavily. So then it puts pressure on to do that again in the future to recoup those costs. Whereas actually, if buyers were a bit more realistic about how much things cost, then they would be able to understand from the beginning, well, we're not going to be able to produce this dress for under $10, say, because it's physically impossible to do at the factory we use, because their manufacturing costs are higher because the welfare is good. And so you have to understand there's a compromise there.
Definitely. And it would have to come from our end, from the buyers, because if a factory is like, we've got good welfare, so we can't do it for below this amount, they just go and find another factory that said that they would do it for less. When I say buyers as well, to clarify, I mean the people that work in the fashion industry who are like deciding where the money goes. Like that's their job title. Fashion buyers. And I think it is the responsibility of brands and the buyers, the people within that are making those decisions of where business is placed. Because the consumer expectation is your clothes are made fairly. And the brands that's their job to consider that for you. And
if the brands wanted to maintain the ridiculously high profit margins, it would mean that our clothes would cost a fortune. And people probably wouldn't buy them because they wouldn't be able to afford them.
No.
But then it's the responsibility of the brand to maybe take a bit of a hit on that.
Yeah, take a bit of a hit. And also maybe consider making less.
Yeah.
We've discussed quite a few times, actually, the sort of fashion seasons and how obviously you're producing new stuff, like every few months, there's more things going out. Do you want to maybe chat a bit about that process?
So for the British high street, and it will be very similar with the American high street as well, I imagine, and in Europe, you can have up to 12 drops of newness a year. So that's every 4 weeks, every 28 days, you've got whole new things in store. And now with online shopping as well, it's actually more than 12 drops. So you've got 12 seasons a year now.
Yeah.
There's only 4 seasons.
Yeah.
And
new season every month.
And actually, the reason we have that is to be able to react to newness, new trends, like what's so-and-so wearing, what's come out on the catwalk, what's come out on the Met Gala, what do people want, what's on TikTok. But it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
And when I've spoken to the designers, I've been a designer before, and the designers I work with now, designers I've previously worked with, are kind of all in agreement that actually it's excessive and there's too many drops. You don't need that many opportunities for newness, because actually what that would mean is, say you cut a third of the drops out, it would mean that for every drop you're able to do better considered pieces that you've had more time to work on. The pieces could be a bit more timeless because they've got to stretch over a few more weeks of time in store. And it would mean that we're not tapping into more micro trends to create new ideas, because it's really hard to come up with new ideas for new things
all the time.
And so actually it'd mean that you could have really put a bit more time and energy into the trends and the stories that you're believing in, and things would be just a lot more considered and a bit more timeless. And you could make things a little more expensive as well to compensate for that, because it would slow the whole pace right down.
Exactly. If you have new stuff every single month, it kind of has to be cheap, because if you want somebody to buy something every single month, they can't be spending like a significant amount of their paycheck on, something that they're only going to wear for a few weeks.
Yeah.
But yeah, the seasons is particularly interesting as well. We've spoken about this before, but it's worth saying again about the seasons of fashion and how they align with like nature's seasons. So, traditionally it's been like a sort of spring, summer, autumn, winter kind of, aligned with the actual natural seasons that we have. But obviously as these little trends come up and more drops have happened, but also as climate change has taken effect and the seasons are sort of blurring together, especially, everywhere really, but we've started to notice it here as well. We've been getting like, wetter summers and warmer winters and so you sort of need stuff that you can wear like
interseasonally.
Yeah, interseasonally, but all the time.
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting in the past, and how this how the sort of micro drops feed into that. Because if you expect that you can go and buy something new every single day of the week, there's no need to plan for the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, we've spoken about this a lot actually in terms of the fashion industry, and every brand will be different, but how you actually time things to drop and what kind of products you're dropping when, it's really needs to be really reevaluated now, because I was still buying wool jumpers in February this year because it was so cold.
Me too.
But actually the brand that I work for, some of their best selling things online are linen trousers in February, because people are getting excited for their holidays. Global travel means you can go be in a hot country any time of year. And so people need swimming costumes, summer clothes, but also winter clothes all year round.
You need to be able to access everything all at once.
Yeah. So the kind of globalism and climate change are kind of really affecting what products are on offer and when.
Yeah. It's hard and expensive unless you find some cheeky loopholes to produce everything all at once.
And Arja Barber talks about this as well in the brands that she worked for, that essentially there became 52 seasons a year.
Yeah.
Because there were drops every month.
Yeah.
And actually what that equates to in numbers of products is outrageous.
Yes, insane.
And she talks about, you know, the amount of dresses on X website and the amount of shirts on offer on this website. And the numbers are ridiculous. And it's all to offer consumer choice.
It is. It's the illusion of choice.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it makes consumers feel like they've got the power. But actually you decide what the trends are and you decide what we're going to be wearing
a year in
advance.
Yeah. Sometimes over a year in advance, because trend forecasting agencies work ahead of design and buying teams.
Yeah.
So we're time of recording, it's August 2024.
Yeah.
Well, trend forecasting agencies are already working on spring summer 26. So they're working 2 years ahead, pretty much.
That's mad. All your decisions are made for you.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of that scene in The Devil Wears Prada where she's like, that sweater you're wearing.
It's not just blue, it's cerulean.
It's cerulean.
Yeah. No, but it really is. I think, do you know what? Actually, The Devil Wears Prada is a great representation of what it can be like working in the fashion industry sometimes.
Yeah.
And I always reference that because people take it really seriously, and at the end of the day, it is just clothes.
Yeah.
But the impact that the clothes we're making has on like the global community can be like massive.
It's enormous. Yeah. But you know, we're so divorced from it. And I think that's the main thing that the book tackles, really, is our disconnect from where all of these things that we're buying come from, like how they get into our houses in the first place, how we manage to accumulate enough of them to be able to have a declutter. You know, like it's all well and good getting rid of your stuff, but you've got to think about where it's going, where it's come from, like, and your place in this enormous chain that we don't consider when we're just going out to buy a top.
No. Something I will touch upon as well on the topic of your decisions are made for you is actually a lot of the people in the fashion industry, not everyone, but a lot of the people in the fashion industry are from very privileged backgrounds. And Arja talks a lot about this at the beginning of the book, and that she was lucky enough to travel, to study, to work, but actually found that when she was living in London, really struggling to pay her rent, and was like talking to her peers who were also interns, like, how are you affording it? The harsh realization that actually a lot of people are funded by the bank of mum and dad.
Yeah.
And that can really impact the offering and the perspectives of the designers and the buyers, because if a lot of the people in the rooms that are deciding on what you're going to wear are from a certain class, from a certain background, have had help, then it massively affects everything. They're not going to have necessarily the same empathy for these people on the other side of the world that are making the clothes.
Yeah,
they're not going to be considering working class people wearing this. It's people of a certain class designing for people of their class at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And that could be quite problematic, I think.
Yeah. We were discussing recently the way that contributes to the lexicon that you use in the industry as well.
Well, Arja talks about this in the book as well.
Yeah, she does.
She references kimonos.
Yes. Yeah, she discusses how, we shouldn't really use that word to talk about like the types of like shawls that we make, because that's a very specific cultural reference. It's a cultural garment, and the things we're making, while they may be sort of mimicking them, are not kimonos.
I think that was a really good example, and that made me consider other things and other language that are used in places I've worked. And we were saying how we don't often use words correctly, and it's more about giving this like rough gist, and everyone kind of in that room knows what you're talking about. And we were talking about where the use of ethnic has been used to mean things that are like bright and colourful in the summer, or that we were talking specifically about ethnic stripes and what that actually means, and the fact that I hadn't really considered that actually using that is really inappropriate, and what do we actually mean by that?
Yeah.
What is an ethnic stripe? Who's ethnicity? But within the kind of room of like designers, buyers, and the people in that industry, it's understood to mean like colourful stripes, things that you might wear or see in like Bali, people doing their gap year might wear, that kind of thing. And the other example was like, when we talk about Navajo print, that you'd have on like sort of zip through fleeces and things like that. But actually, Navajo, my understanding is that is a tribe of people. That's not like a thing.
Yeah.
That's not a print.
It's a very specific culture.
But our kind of like Western understanding of that is this particular type of pattern.
Yeah.
But it's actually really undermining to talk about this pattern and use the term Navajo, because they're very, very different things.
Yeah. And we chatted about folk as well, like folky. I found that particularly interesting from my perspective as well, because a lot of my work is about folk horror, and there's a massive discussion ongoing in the sort of academic community about who we actually mean by the folk.
Yeah.
But it's like thrown around in fashion, like, oh, you know, it's folksy, it's, you know, like...
It's like woodsy, it's like folkloric, it's, you know... Yeah, and it's the same with like boho, we throw boho around, but there's kind of an understanding about what a boho aesthetic is. It's got actually nothing to do with like bohemian culture.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all examples like that it's not meant with like any malice, because it's just the word used to describe that thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think people think about it.
Yeah, we were discussing how it's sort of like, it's more symbolism than actual definition. But the way that symbol has come to mean what it means is sort of through this web of colonialism and stereotyping, because in order to say a single word to describe a print or whatever and have everybody know what you mean, you all have to sort of have the same idea of what that is. And it really speaks to the makeup of the fashion industry in that way, as Arj was saying, and as you just touched on as well, about the privilege of it and the, you know, the overwhelming like whiteness as well of the fashion industry. Like there's nobody to sort of push back and check that, you know, that language.
Yeah. But this is why Arj talking about it is so important, and her having been in the fashion industry really speaks to other people in the industry.
Yeah, it's really that, like, it's the focus on these sort of systemic issues in the book that really made me like it so much. I think a lot of sort of eco stuff puts a lot of onus on the consumer to act, but like ultimately it does have to come from the top. I think, like from the corporations themselves. And I think Arja does a really good job of balancing that sort of, you know, individual responsibility. Like, while important, it's not going to solve the problem by itself. Like us, you know, drinking through plastic straws or only buying one pair of trousers a year or whatever. It's not going to stop what is happening from happening unless it comes from up there.
I think though, let's talk about some of the things that she suggests that you can do to help, because obviously, like you just said, it's not just about clothes. It's such a complex interlinking of things we've mentioned: the capitalism, consumerism, and colonialism, the three C's. And it can, you know, I think sometimes it can feel like such a huge problem. You don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about, you know, a lot of the time it's onus on the companies and not the consumers. But I think from my point of view, one thing that as a consumer you can do from like your point of view, and Arsha talks about in the book, is actually really educating yourself about clothes. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of people now don't know about fibres. They don't know about how to care for their clothes. And so a lot of the time you might have bought something from a shop that you didn't read the care label. I mean, how many people read the care label really? I do, because, you know.
I do now because of you.
But a lot of people don't. They just look at the thing and go, I like that. That's a nice top. But actually haven't realised that it's made from viscose, which is a cellulose fibre, and it shrinks and you can't tumble dry it. Yeah. And they've chucked it in the tumble dryer and they've gone, it's shrunk. It doesn't fit me now. And so then it ends up in the charity pile. And it's like, you know, that's how things end up in landfill. Yeah. So actually educating yourself on kind of the different fibres and how to care for those things, and look at all those little symbols on the care tag. Can I tumble dry this? Can I iron it? And actually, if you're someone that's super busy and you do not have time to be waiting for things to line dry or take stuff to the dry cleaners, maybe don't buy that. Yeah. and find something else. Yeah. Because otherwise you're never going to wear it. Yeah. And ultimately, if you're not wearing it, it's going to go in that charity bag. Yeah. Or if it's, you know, if you buy a linen shirt, for example, linen creases. Yeah. And it
creases like crazy.
It creases. And so if you are not someone that wants to be sat with a steamer or an iron, ironing that shirt.
Yeah. Or unless you're someone that wants to go around with a creased shirt.
Yeah. Then, you know, linen blends are great. Linen viscose is really good because the viscose helps the fabric become more drapey, and so you're not going to get as much creasing. Or, you know, if you're buying trousers for work, are they polyester? Because if they're 100% polyester, you're going to be very sweaty.
Yeah.
Some people might be fine with that.
Yeah.
But if you're going to hate...
might like being sweaty.
Some people might like being sweaty.
You never know.
But if you're going to hate that, and then you're going to go, oh my gosh, my office is so hot and those trousers are really sweaty, you're not going to wear them.
No.
So just... I think my big thing that consumers can do, and it's really easy, you can just, you know, there are lots of websites that we can put in the show notes that I can direct people to. Love Your Clothes is a great one.
Nice.
There's lots of very simple information on there about what those little symbols mean and kind of a little bit about the different fibres that your clothes are going to be made from. And also, it's really good to check your labels if you're ever charity shopping. We've just been charity shopping.
Yeah.
And I was telling you how to have a little feel, have a squidge, and like keep an eye out for any cashmere jumpers, because sometimes in charity shops they'll just label and price things based on how they look and not on what they're made of.
Yeah.
And you can get a real bargain.
Yeah.
I've got cashmere jumpers from outlet charity shops for £1.
Yeah.
And you know, they're so much nicer. They feel more luxurious. You've got to take care of them. But I've got, fortunately, enough cashmere jumpers from charity shops now to do a whole delicate load. But yeah, it's really important. And also, you're going to be getting clothes that work better for you, that are like in keeping with your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And are nicer.
Yeah. And that's also how you end up developing a personal style.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot about personal style online recently, and people, you know, they'll go out and buy like a bunch of stuff that they think they'll like. But I think that's the way to do it, is be considered about it. Like, go find the bargains in the charity shop and find things that work for you, and that will become your style. You don't have to style yourself after a specific aesthetic or trend or whatever. You can just build your wardrobe organically.
Yeah, it doesn't all have to happen at once. I'm so guilty of that, of like starting a new job and being like, I need a whole new wardrobe. And actually... Yeah, I've done it too. We've all been there. Yeah. And I think Arja talks about this in the book as well sometimes. It's actually like, do I need the clothes, or is there something else going on?
Yeah. That is so
and she
real.
does speak about that in the book, and it's
does.
that kind of the capitalism and the consumerism filling these like holes.
Yeah, it is. Again, it's like, it's a self-esteem thing, isn't it? Like there's just a, you know, there's something that you need to fix. And for some reason, we all just think a new wardrobe is going to do that.
Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's things you can do as an individual. And, you know, additionally, Arja discusses, you know, getting involved in politics, like writing to MPs. Like if you see anything, in the news, like relating to clothes or fashion,
or the climate crisis.
Even. You know, you can write to your representatives and make sure that they're taking your views to the House of Commons or wherever else you are. Not the House of Commons if you don't live in the UK. That would be completely pointless. And campaigning for systemic change as well. If you're that type of person, go join a little climate rally. Yeah. That's fun. And most of the time, safe.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to do as well, if you're not like, I'm not particularly like massively politically engaged. And I think it was a good idea to write to my MP, but I don't think I would feel open to do that. So something else she suggests is actually just writing to the brands.
Yeah.
And it makes such a difference. And Arja touches on this in the book, that actually brands will often have policies in place that if they've had so many complaints or so many emails about X, they have to do something about it. And whether that's just taking it into the boardroom and it's on the agenda to begin with, or whether actually it takes it further than that, just writing to the brands and being like, hey, like, I'd like to know more about where my clothes are from, or what your sustainability targets are, or, 100%. Where, what are the factory conditions, policies that you have in place. If you're writing to brands, they will listen, because as a customer, you have a lot of power to the brands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they want your money, so they'll do what you're asking.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's power in numbers. You know, you can get your friends to write as well.
Yeah.
You know, make a tweet.
Yeah.
An X. I don't know what to call it anymore. Yeah, there's a lot you can do as an individual.
Because brands, they want to maintain their image.
Yeah.
It's
100%.
really important to them.
Yeah.
And the reason a lot of brands have started to offer more sustainable ranges, create ambitious sustainability targets, is because there's a consumer demand for it. And that's the only reason.
Yeah.
They don't actually, I mean, it sounds harsh to say, but like a lot of the companies wouldn't have done that had there not been a consumer demand for it.
Absolutely. But also being really critical of the actions that you see brands taking.
Yeah.
Because, you know, so
she speaks about greenwashing.
Yes, she does. She speaks about greenwashing. So yeah, in the same vein, you want to be really critical about what sort of progress, in air quotes, that you're seeing from brands. Because like a good example, I think, is that Shein factory tour that was done a few months ago now, where they took a bunch of sort of smaller influencers out to the Shein factory, and it was like dead. It was empty. And you can guarantee that, you know, allegedly, I don't want to get sued or anything, but like you can almost guarantee that is like a stage factory.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to be making stuff in there. It was all like machines and like high tech equipment, and like it was all white and clean.
I mean, a lot of factories are like that.
Yeah.
But then, like I said, with the subcontracting,
the
a lot of the time, not everything is made in factories like that. Yeah. And that is how a good factory should be. Yeah. But that's not always.
That's not where the stuff's going to be made, to be clear. Probably, allegedly. So yeah, just be really critical about what progress you see from brands and greenwashing in general, because a lot of brands do partake in that. There'll be like a sustainable range, but because sustainable doesn't really mean anything, like it's essentially just a marketing term. Like, what are we sustaining?
Yeah, because Aja talks about this as well. Like, polyester is technically of the earth because it's made from crude oil.
Yeah, technically.
So technically,
it's plastic.
Polyester is earth friendly because it's come from the earth, but it doesn't biodegrade. It can be really difficult to recycle sometimes if it's been blended with other fibers. So it's not just it's very grey area, but it's not just a case of like polyester is bad, and if I buy this sustainable recycled polyester dress, it's better. It depends on like, is that a timeless piece? Are you going to wear it again? Because actually, the more times you recycle polyester, it reduces in quality. So it's the whole thing. It's like, how many times are you going to wear it? Do you love it? Because buy something. If it's polyester and you love it and you're going to wear it 100 times, fine.
Worth it.
Buy it. That's better than buying a sustainable viscose dress that you're going to wear once.
Yeah. It's all, you know, cost per wear, not just financial cost per wear, but environmental cost per wear as well.
And I think also on the greenwashing thing, what I said earlier about like informing yourself about fabrics, fibers, how to care for things, that's going to really help as well. Because if someone's saying, we've got a sustainable range, it's got natural fibers in it, and you look in that label and it's actually only 10% cotton.
Yeah, absolutely. You can say, I don't think so.
10% organic cotton. That's tokenistic then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, actually, if it's 100% organic cotton, now you might be talking.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah.
Nice. I think that's a good place to end.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's all we've got time for with Aja Barber's Consumed. We hope this conversation has been a reminder that while individual actions are important and there's a lot you can do, it's crucial to push for broader systemic change.
Absolutely. We can all play a part, whether it's through mindful consumption, advocating for corporate responsibility, or simply educating ourselves and others.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning into this first ever episode of Fossil Fools. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review and don't forget to check out the show notes for further reading on today's discussions.
And we love to hear your thoughts. Reach out to us on Instagram at fossilfoolspod to keep the conversation going, and subscribe to us on Spotify to get notified when our next episode comes out.
Great. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Everything wiped out. Maybe the last broadcast.